La la la, I sure do love playing my Sierra games. So interesting to think that adventure games didn't end with LucasArts games. And boy, is it such a fun time. And it's really interesting actually, because there's so much I can explore that I haven't actually had the chance yet. I mean, there's King's Quest, there's Space Quest, and I'm really looking forward to exploring Hello?
We've been watching you. You're diving too deep. Turn back to LucasArts games before you get hurt. And just to show you, we're serious.
I don't know what this means, but I think it calls for a montage. Wait a minute. It couldn't be. Tonight, we're going to talk about Gabriel Knight for the next
19
minutes.
For the purpose of this video, I'm going to be covering both the original Sierra release of Gabriel Knight and the 20th anniversary edition by Pinkerton Road Studios. The original game was released in 1993 and featured a pretty renowned cast of actors such as Mark Hamill, Michael Dorn, Leah Remini, and starring Tim Curry as the titular protagonist, Gabriel Knight. The remaster was released in 2014, featuring updated graphics and music while also replacing the voice cast and including new puzzles and rearranging parts of the story into what could be considered the director's cut of Gabriel Knight. Gabriel is an author who is looking for inspiration for a new book and begins to research mysterious murders that have occurred in New Orleans, which have been dubbed as the Voodoo Murders in the media. Alongside these murders, Gabriel is plagued with nightmares of voodoo rituals. Gameplay of Gabriel Knight consists of typical adventure game standards, although if you're exploring through Noir Reservoir videos in order, then you'll realise that unlike the original versions of Space Quest 1 and King's Quest 1, Gabriel Knight does not use a parser, but instead allows the player to select icons to interact with the world, similar to later games in the Space and King's Quest series. Being an investigation game, A lot of the gameplay consists of Gabriel communicating with many characters as he unravels the mystery surrounding the mysterious deaths plaguing New Orleans. Unlike many of Sierra's titles at the time where death and dead ends were ripe for the picking, Gabriel Knight was a little different. For one thing, I didn't find myself dying 30 seconds into the game. The player could explore a majority of the game uninhibited, exploring to their heart's content, while also dabbling in some criminal activity such as stealing police files and impersonating a police officer and a priest.
It's Father McLaughlin to see you.
I'm not too sure if the last one is a crime, but let's face it, you're morally an asshole for misleading an old woman like that, and I love it. Despite the activities that Gabriel can get up to, he is never actually punished for doing them. His dead-ass creepy flirting as a cop actually works, and he's not reported to the real police, and he's never actually caught pretending to be a priest. In fact, the closest thing that can be considered to being punished is if he sneaks the files out of the police station instead of photocopying them. And even then, the only punishment is that the policewoman, who he no longer needs to talk to, will not talk to him.
Oh no, however will I survive now?
As a result, Gabriel Knight is relatively free from punishing the player from exploring and interacting with the environment, which is definitely a welcome change from the previous Sierra games. However, that isn't to say that there isn't some consequences in store if he pokes his head where it shouldn't be. It's when the player hits days 4 and 5 that things begin to take a sinister turn. As Gabriel finds himself delving further into the case, he begins to find himself being stalked by strangers outside of his store, dead animals being left on his property, and people around him dying, including himself. Earlier I mentioned that deaths were not as prominent in Gabriel Knight. And while there might not be as many as their other prominent games such as Space Quest and King's Quest, there are certainly ways to let Gabriel die. And he'll likely die plenty. You'll often see me comparing remasters alongside the director's cut of Broken Sword. If you've seen that video, you'll know that I was pretty critical about the director's cut. It included awkward puzzles that added nothing to the game, while removing content such as humorous deaths and such. As a result of my negative views, I used that as a benchmark to compare other remasters. Now, Gabriel Knight's 20th anniversary remaster is pretty faithful to the original game. In fact, deaths are still included in the remaster. On day 5, Gabriel finds himself on the receiving end of a Python's scaly grip, and if the player doesn't react fast enough, he'll die. In the original game, the player will need to either restore a previous game, restart, or as custom for Sierra games, rage quit. In the remaster, however, the options are to restart, restore a save, or retry using the game's autosave function, which means that if the player does slip up, they can immediately jump right back into it.
I really don't want to be dead. Can we try that again?
Yeah, I don't think it really works that way, pal.
Another factor is that in some remasters, the developers sometimes edit some of the more difficult puzzles to be a bit more accessible. To return back to Broken Sword as an example, the game featured what is known as the infamous goat puzzle, which was deemed incredibly difficult by players and was later toned down in the director's cut. However, Gabriel Knight's 20th anniversary edition keeps one of the game's most infamous puzzles untouched: the voodoo message on the tomb wall. Throughout the game, Gabriel finds that people are writing messages on a tomb in a graveyard to dictate orders, which you can try to decipher as if it's the world's most shite Wheel of Fortune game. In order to ensure that a coffin with a hidden tracker is brought to the meeting, Gabriel needs to write his own message advising to bring the coffin. As a result, the message will consist of a request for Dr. John to bring the coffin, known as a CK module.
I don't even know what the fuck a CK module is. I mean, if you Google it, it only comes up with complaints about how god-awful this puzzle is. Why even writing a puzzle in a graveyard? If you want to be a bit conspicuous, there is a thing called email.
Following the tracker leads us to the meeting and a potential death. If the player enters the meeting without a mask, then Dr. John will kill Gabriel. Which makes sense, you just walked into a cult of voodoo murderers without disguise. How did you think that was going to pan out? However, that isn't the end of the danger, as Gabriel also needs to make sure that he has a tattoo painted on him by Grace before he enters or he dies. Now how would you know? Well, you wouldn't. And we learn one of the other harsh lessons of Sierra games.
Hindsight is a bitch.
There is realistically no way to truly know that entering the ceremony without the tattoo will kill Gabriel, which is why it's important to save. I'm fairly certain that if all players who went through this without a guide reached this point, they'd have found themselves dying. The ceremony takes place and we realise that Malia is in fact the voodoo priestess, shocking Gabriel, who passes out before being rescued by Grace, who brings us back home. Eventually, the investigation leads us to stopping off in Germany, where he learns that his family has a bitching castle, and he begins to learn that his ancestors were supernatural hunters known as Schattenjäger, including his uncle Wolfgang, and that it's his destiny to become one himself. But he needs to perform a ceremony to do so. The ceremony features many steps for Gabriel to perform, although one of the more peculiar is washing his hands step. Not that the step itself is weird, but the requirement is. In the original game, this involves opening the window and cleaning his hands in fresh fallen snow. In the remaster, the snowy weather is removed and instead he uses water from a water puddle. However, why he just doesn't use a sink in the bathroom in both versions is beyond me. Adventure games! After performing the ceremony, Gabriel comes face to face with a dragon in his dreams who announces him as a Schattenjäger, and then proceeds to breathe fire on him. With this, he awakens to find the key to the library, where he learns that his uncle Wolfgang has travelled to Africa to seek the remains of Tetelo and the Ritter amulet. After charging another obscene amount to our dearly deceased friend Mosley's card, Gabriel heads off to Africa. Inside the Snake Mound is a truly haunting atmosphere that still chills me to the bone. In each room is a panel slot, and Gabriel needs to insert them in order to proceed. As he proceeds through each room, there consists of a few dead mummies nearby that are truly unsettling, and at times, warnings about nearby footsteps appear. From what I can see, these mean absolutely nothing, but they're still terrifying to see, as normally in a Sierra game, this suggests that death is about to spring up and the player needs to get the fuck out of there. After placing all the slots correctly and following the theme of the free snakes by using a key on the free snake panel, Gabriel opens a nearby door, but also happens to awaken the mummies who are seeking to kill him. Fortunately, our badass uncle Wolfgang shows up and kicks some mummy ass, allowing us to hide in a secret room where a sacrificial altar sits. Wolfgang gives a big speech suggesting he's about to die, but then suggests Gabriel go cut out the heart of a mummy to open the chest to reveal the talisman, and Gabriel, being incredibly dense, doesn't realise what's happening and goes to do it before Wolfgang proceeds to rip his own heart out of his chest, in a pretty baller move. Gabriel heads back to New Orleans, where he discovers that Mosley is actually still alive. Whoops. Together they decide to search for and infiltrate the Voodoo headquarters. And by together I mean Mosley runs off, obviously leaving us to figure out for ourselves. The Voodoo headquarters just so happens to be located beneath the church, which requires the snake key to be used in the confessional, acting as a form of elevator and leading us into the endgame. It's at the endgame of Gabriel Knight that the true cruelty of Sierra arises. In the Voodoo cartel's headquarters, Gabriel can find his unfortunate end quite frequently. However, it's not the deaths that are the cruelty. If there's anything that can be considered a crueler practice than voodoo, then it might be the practice of dead ends in adventure games. Dead ends are where the player accidentally lock themselves into unwinnable situations. Sierra games are often infamous for these moments, but Gabriel Knight is pretty lenient when it comes to this. In fact, I would probably consider there to be only one true moment of a dead end in the entire game, and that comes at the end of the game. When exploring the underground layer, Gabriel can snatch a key pass to allow him into a locked bedroom where Grace is being kept. Now if you're anything like me, once you do anything in a Sierra game, you might save the game. However, if you've entered this room without meeting all the requirements, then you have screwed yourself and you'll need to reload a previous save.
You have been making multiple saves now, haven't you? Right? Yeah, this is a Sierra game, what did you expect?
So what makes this scenario unwinnable? Well, for one thing, once you enter this room, you will not be able to leave it yourself to go back and collect some of the items, as the ceremony will begin to prepare and there will be people outside. Gabriel can wake up Grace with the amulet, which he will automatically have, but in order to bypass by Dr. John, he'll need to pick up a disguise. Dr. John will eventually come in, and if Gabriel isn't disguised, he'll become splatted like a bug on a windshield. The player might reload the game and remember to pick up the costume, but another requirement is needed to safely complete the game, helping Mosley find the hidden headquarters. Without the aid of our police officer friend, neither Gabriel nor Grace will manage to survive the voodoo ritual. The game does try to make it clear that the player needs to help make sure Mosley finds the headquarters using the tracker Gabriel already has. The player needs to leave the snake key and the tracker in the confessional for Roy to show up. If the player has potentially only used one save slot and happened to save when they entered Grace's room without disguises or Mosley's assistance, well, you've encountered a dead end and you'll need to restart the entire game again. This isn't really an issue with the 20th anniversary edition. While the game doesn't omit these deaths, it does feature its own autosave function, where Gabriel will be able to reload prior to the death. It also prevents the player from making their own save in the scenario, greying out the option. With Mosley and Grace on our side, we manage to stop the ritual and Mosley fatally shoots Dr. John, who falls on the pedestal, opening it and revealing the Geddes idol. As Tetelo attempts to slit Gabriel's throat, he manages to grab and break the idol, thus opening some sort of gateway to hell which attempts to suck Malia into. Gabriel tends to save her, but realising that she needs to end it, she lets go, falling into the flames. Sins of the Father ends as Gabriel and Grace look on at the carnage that they've caused. The kind that will probably have some sort of adverse effect on climate change, like Jesus Christ. The two muse on how Gabriel has changed, and he plans to continue on as a Schattenjäger, hinting heavily towards a sequel.
Yes, there is one, and yeah, I will play it.
And that is Gabriel Knight, perhaps one of Sierra's finest games. I've enjoyed playing through the Sierra games, but something about Gabriel Knight shines above the rest. Perhaps it's the interesting story, the fun characters, or perhaps it's just a coincidence that my favourite Sierra game is the one that didn't trap me in bullshit for the entirety of the game. Want to make sure you don't miss out on the Gabriel Knight sequel video when it's released? Then make sure you don't forget to subscribe to Noir Reservoir and click that little bell down there to be kept up to date on all future Noir Reservoir videos. Likes and comments are always appreciated too. So until next time my friends, I'll catch you later.